The mind is the battlefield where destiny is determined, the arena where victory and defeat are decided long before the world sees the outcome. Every thought you entertain, every habit you cultivate, and every decision you make is wiring your brain for either greatness or mediocrity. Dopamine is not a reward. It is not the feeling you get when you finally achieve something. It is the divine fuel that propels you toward the vision of what you are called to become. It is the substance that heaven has placed inside the brain to keep you moving forward, to keep you seeking, striving, and overcoming. When you feel tired, unmotivated, or lazy, it is not because you were created without power. It is because the fire of dopamine is either misdirected or undernourished. Every time you imagine a future, every time you set your eyes on something greater than yourself, the neurons of your brain release this chemical to say, move, pursue, go after it. Laziness, then, is not a fixed identity. It is the silence of a system designed to roar with pursuit. When people allow themselves to become chained to comfort, when they surrender to fleeting pleasures and empty distractions, the dopamine system begins to dull, like a sword left unused, gathering rust in its sheath. But the opposite is also true. When you train your brain to pursue, when you attach your vision to a purpose higher than pleasure, you awaken this system and transform ordinary effort into extraordinary endurance. Consider how the mind responds not to what you already have, but to what is just beyond your reach. The spark of motivation lives in anticipation, in the faith that what is unseen can be brought into reality. This is why men and women of vision rise up, even in the face of impossible odds, because their brain's pursuit system is fueled not by what is easy, but by what is meaningful. The same pathway that fuels addiction can fuel transformation if it is tied to righteous pursuit. The same molecule that drives someone toward destruction can drive another toward destiny. It is not the presence of dopamine that defines your life, but the object of your pursuit. This is why discipline and worship align so powerfully, because both direct the dopamine system toward a higher calling. When you fast, when you pray, when you sacrifice temporary ease for eternal gain, you are literally rewiring your brain's motivation circuitry to love what is holy and despise what is empty. Your brain learns to crave righteousness the way others crave fleeting pleasure. The so-called laziness that once enslaved you becomes the fire that drives you, because you have shifted the reward system from momentary comfort to eternal vision. Every effort you invest in this redirection strengthens the neural highways of pursuit, carving grooves in your brain that make motivation more natural, more instinctive, more unstoppable. Dopamine does not reward idleness, it rewards action. But it rewards it even more powerfully when the action is connected to meaning. When you rise early and discipline your body, when you break free from distractions and train your mind, the dopamine system begins to release anticipation not for escape but for progress. This is why the warriors of faith and science both endure struggles ordinary men cannot, because their minds are taught to release energy and strength in the midst of pursuit. Laziness melts in the presence of holy pursuit, because the same neurobiology that fuels apathy can be flipped into relentless drive. God designed this chemical not as a curse, but as a compass, pointing you toward what you value most. If you set your value on vanity, you will chase shadows. But if you set it on truth, on greatness, on eternal life, then dopamine becomes your ally, your inner fire, your relentless guide to keep pressing forward no matter how weary your body feels, no matter how many times the world tells you it cannot be done. For you were never made to be lazy, you were made to pursue, and every spark of dopamine in your brain testifies that you were created for movement, for discipline, for victory. Motivation is not a mystery. It is a system built into the very design of your brain, a system that responds to how you think, how you act, and what you pursue. When you feel powerless, when laziness wraps around your mind like chains, it is not because you lack strength. It is because you have not yet trained the pathways that awaken motivation. The brain is like fertile soil. Whatever you plant in it, whatever you water with repetition and attention, that is what will grow. If you feed your brain with excuses, with endless comforts, with the thought that tomorrow will be the day you change, then those weeds of inaction will entangle your potential. But if you feed it with vision, with clarity, with the decision to act now, you begin to carve pathways of motivation so powerful that laziness loses its grip on you. The truth is, your brain is not built to stay in neutral. It is wired either to decay in apathy or to surge forward in purpose. Every small choice you make tilts the balance in one direction or the other. Each morning when you wake, your actions begin to teach your nervous system what matters. If you scroll through distractions, your brain learns that idleness is valuable, and it will seek more of it. But if you move toward prayer, discipline, work, or study, your brain learns that pursuit is valuable, and it begins to release the chemistry of motivation more freely. You are training your brain every single day, whether you realize it or not. Motivation is not about waiting for a magical feeling to arrive. It is about harnessing the system God has placed inside you and directing it toward the right pursuits. Your thoughts, your actions, and your habits send constant signals to your brain about what matters most. If you align those signals with your higher calling, your brain will reward you with strength, focus, and drive. But if you align them with laziness, your brain will slowly turn off the circuits of motivation, making it harder and harder to rise when the moment of calling comes. That is why you cannot afford to live passively, because every moment you are shaping the very system that determines your destiny. Think of motivation as a fire within you. At first, it may seem like a small spark flickering in the darkness of doubt and fatigue. But when you feed it with the right fuel, discipline, vision, and faith, it grows into a flame that begins to consume apathy. And once that fire grows strong enough, it no longer waits for you to push it forward. It begins to pull you toward greatness. Suddenly, what once felt impossible becomes instinctive because your brain circuits have been rewired to crave progress more than comfort. The brain begins to expect growth, to expect pursuit, to expect movement because that has become its new normal. This is the transformation of laziness into power, not a miracle that happens by chance, but a process of aligning your brain with eternal truth. It is the daily decision to fuel the fire of motivation instead of feeding the weeds of apathy. It is the relentless act of choosing vision over distraction, discipline over ease, calling over comfort. Every time you choose to act, your brain releases signals that strengthen the pathway of pursuit. And the more you repeat this, the stronger it becomes, until laziness no longer feels natural and movement toward purpose becomes the default. This is the power of neurobiology placed in you by design, not to enslave you to weakness, but to equip you to rise into the fullness of who you were created to be. Clarity of vision is the anchor of motivation. Without it, the human mind drifts like a ship lost at sea, tossed about by every distraction and desire that arises. The brain cannot pursue what it cannot see. If your life is clouded by vagueness, by uncertainty about where you are going and why you are going there, then your brain has no target to aim its energy toward. And energy without direction is wasted. The circuits of motivation within you are like an arrow waiting to be released, but unless you define the target, that arrow never flies. Laziness often thrives not because you are weak, but because you have failed to give your brain a compelling reason to move forward. When you set a clear vision, something extraordinary happens within the mind. The fog lifts, the chemistry of anticipation begins to flow, and your brain starts to recognize patterns and opportunities that align with that vision. This is how the Creator designed your mind. It locks onto what you decide is important, and it begins to filter out the noise. Suddenly, you start noticing open doors that were always there, but hidden in plain sight. This is not coincidence. It is the power of clarity reshaping the way your mind sees reality. When you say, "This is my calling," "This is my purpose," you ignite circuits in your brain that direct your attention, focus your thoughts, and fuel your will. But when vision is absent, laziness fills the void. Without clarity, the brain defaults to the easiest option: comfort, distraction, idleness. You wake up without direction, and so you reach for whatever is closest: your phone, your comfort, your excuses. The result is a cycle of inaction, because your brain is not being called to something greater. This is why people often feel unmotivated, not because they lack energy, but because they lack vision. Energy without purpose collapses into waste. Vision without action collapses into fantasy. But vision paired with disciplined pursuit transforms everything. Vision is not simply about setting goals. It is about aligning your life with eternal purpose. When your vision is tethered to something higher than yourself, when it is connected to the truth of why you were created, the fire of motivation becomes unstoppable. Your brain no longer sees action as optional, it sees it as necessary. Every step you take toward that vision reinforces the circuits of pursuit, building a momentum that pushes you forward even when fatigue whispers in your ear. This is why those with clarity seem unstoppable. They are not working harder than you. They are simply working with sharper focus, and their brain rewards them with energy and endurance because it knows exactly what they are after. And understand this clarity is a spiritual discipline as much as it is a mental one. To seek clarity is to humble yourself before God, to say, "Not my wandering desires, but your purpose be my vision." When you align your brain with divine clarity, laziness has no room to thrive. The fog of confusion that once kept you paralyzed is burned away by the light of truth. Your steps become ordered, your actions meaningful, and your energy channeled into something greater than comfort. The mind becomes a servant of destiny, not a slave to distraction. This is how laziness is defeated and power is unleashed, not through vague wishes or half-hearted effort, but through the burning clarity of vision that commands your brain to rise, to move, to act. Clarity is the weapon that silences apathy and sharpens your mind for the battle of purpose. Discipline is the bridge between vision and action, the sacred structure that transforms motivation into tangible results. Without it, clarity and desire remain dreams. With it, they become reality. The brain is wired to seek comfort, to avoid effort, and to conserve energy, but it was never designed to remain idle. Laziness is not your true nature. It is a byproduct of untamed impulses and untrained neural circuits. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of decision, making, and self-control, is like a muscle. It strengthens through repeated practice and weakens through neglect. Every time you rise above the pull of immediate gratification, every time you resist distraction and choose focus, you are literally sculpting the brain's capacity for discipline, turning it into an instrument of unstoppable power. Discipline is not punishment. It is the alignment of your natural biology with the higher calling placed within you. God has has wired the brain to respond to patterns, to repetition, to consistency. When you structure your day around deliberate, purposeful actions, the neurons of motivation fire in harmony, creating pathways that make focus, persistence, and achievement habitual. This is why people who appear effortlessly productive are not lucky. They are simply walking in the neural architecture they built over time. Every choice, no matter how small, is either reinforcing laziness or reinforcing mastery. Discipline is the daily act of choosing mastery. The mind that has learned discipline begins to anticipate action rather than avoid it. The brain's reward systems, including dopamine circuits, begin to respond not just to outcomes but to the process itself. You start to feel satisfaction in the act of pursuing, not merely in the result. This is holy alignment, the desire to act, the energy to act, and the purpose to act, all converging into one unstoppable flow. Every step becomes easier, not because the work has diminished, but because your brain now expects progress, craves it, and is biologically reinforced to continue. Laziness loses its grip because the neural circuits that once encouraged inaction have been replaced by the pathways of relentless pursuit. Discipline also trains the spirit. The scriptures tell us that self-control is a fruit of the spirit, and the act of choosing discipline is an act of surrender to something greater than self. Every resisted temptation, every act of delayed gratification is a prayer enacted in neural pathways. Your mind, body, and spirit learn to act in unison, and what was once laborious becomes natural. What was once forced becomes fluid. You become a vessel of intentionality, able to direct your energy toward creation rather than destruction, toward purpose rather than drift, toward victory rather than stagnation. Yet discipline is not a solitary struggle. It is a covenant with truth and with destiny. The enemy will constantly attempt to lure you back into chaos, to whisper that resistance is unnecessary, that comfort is preferable, that ease is freedom. But every act of discipline pushes back the tide of mediocrity and opens the path for greatness. The brain learns to expect these acts as the norm, rewiring itself to make focus and persistence effortless over time. This is how laziness is transformed, not by hope alone, not by temporary bursts of energy, but by the steady, unyielding rhythm of disciplined action that trains the very biology of the mind. Greatness is not stumbled upon by accident. It is cultivated through discipline, vision, and the constant shaping of the mind toward purpose. The brain is wired to seek patterns, to conserve energy, and to follow the path of least resistance. But those who are called to rise above mediocrity must refuse the easy path and instead train their thoughts with relentless intention. The word declares that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, meaning that the destiny of a life flows directly from the meditations of the mind. If the mind is filled with fear, doubt, and compromise, the life will reflect weakness and instability. But when the mind is saturated with truth, anchored in faith, and fortified with holy determination, the life reflects greatness that glorifies God. Science tells us that the brain is plastic. It changes according to what it repeatedly experiences. This means that your habits are not just actions, they are sculptors, chiseling the pathways of your mind. Every thought you dwell on, every choice you repeat, every word you speak is laying down tracks that your future will run upon. If you allow negativity, laziness, and sin to dominate, you are literally hardwiring defeat into your own being. But if you choose prayer, discipline, excellence, and focus, you are wiring greatness into the very structure of your brain. This is why the Bible urges us to set our minds on things above, not on earthly things, because what you set your mind upon, you become. Greatness requires a willingness to endure what others avoid. The brain craves comfort, but greatness is forged in discomfort. But mind resists pressure, but greatness is refined through it. Just as steel is strengthened by fire, the brain is sharpened by struggle. And those who run from difficulty remain weak, while those who endure it grow strong. When you rise early to pray while others sleep, when you study while others waste time, when you resist temptation while others give in, you are not just winning a single battle, you are shaping a mind that cannot be broken. But greatness is never about the self, it is about being a vessel for God's glory. When your mind is surrendered, He directs your thoughts, He sharpens your focus, He gives you visions beyond your natural imagination. Greatness in the kingdom is humility wrapped in strength, discipline wrapped in grace, courage wrapped in obedience. To hardwire the brain for greatness is to invite God to take His rightful place on the throne of your mind, so that every thought is filtered through His will. The enemy knows the power of a disciplined, God-centered mind, which is why he attacks with distraction, temptation, and lies. He wants to scatter your thoughts so that you cannot build momentum, to fill your heart with fear so that you shrink back, to weigh you down with guilt so that you feel unworthy of rising. But greatness demands resistance to these attacks, not in your own strength, but in the authority of Christ. When you rebuke the lies with truth, when you confront fear with faith, when you cast down imaginations that exalt themselves against God, you fortify your mind against the schemes of darkness. Greatness is not a title you wear, it is a process you live. It is the result of daily surrender, daily discipline, Daily focus on what truly matters. When the brain is trained to align with eternal purpose, greatness ceases to be a distant dream and becomes a daily reality. Every thought taken captive, every habit surrendered to God, every action aligned with His will becomes another step toward the life of impact you were destined to walk in. Endurance is the crown of a disciplined mind, the final frontier where motivation, clarity, and vision are forged into unshakable strength. The brain is designed to conserve energy, to seek comfort, to avoid the pain of prolonged effort. But those who are called to walk in purpose must learn to override these instincts. Endurance is not merely physical stamina, it is the spiritual and mental fortitude to persist when the body protests, when the world discourages, and when the enemy whispers lies meant to derail your calling. It is the relentless refusal to surrender to laziness, distraction, or despair, and the conscious choice to keep moving toward what God has placed before you. Science affirms that the brain strengthens through repeated exposure to challenge. Neural pathways are reinforced by persistence, and with each act of endurance, motivation becomes easier, focus sharper, and resistance to temptation stronger. But beyond biology, there is a divine dimension. God measures endurance not by the absence of struggle, but by faithfulness in the midst of it. Every time you rise above fatigue, resist the pull of comfort, or choose discipline over ease, you are not only sculpting your neural circuits, but also proving your trust in a higher power. Endurance becomes a spiritual weapon, a testimony of the mind's ability to align with eternal truth. Endurance also requires faith in the unseen. The brain responds to immediate feedback, to visible rewards, but greatness demands trust in outcomes not yet realized. This is where spiritual practice intersects with neuroscience. Prayer, meditation, fasting, and worship train the mind to act in alignment with purpose, even when the path is unclear. By reinforcing these habits daily, the brain learns to associate perseverance with reward, and the once dreaded effort begins to release its own internal motivation. Laziness fades not through guilt, but through repetition of purposeful action, until persistence becomes instinctive and victory inevitable. The enemy understands the power of endurance, which is why he attacks with doubt, fear, and distraction at the very moments when persistence matters most. But the mind trained in endurance sees these attacks not as obstacles, but as tests, not as failures, but as opportunities to strengthen the neural and spiritual pathways of resilience. Each resisted temptation, each sustained effort, each choice to rise above weakness is a victory that reshapes the brain, fortifies the spirit, and moves the soul closer to its calling. Endurance transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. The same brain that once succumbed to lethargy now thrives on challenge. Every effort you sustain is a brick laid in the foundation of a life that will not be shaken. Your focus sharpens, your resolve strengthens, and your actions become a reflection of the eternal truth that you were created for purpose, not for passivity. When motivation wavers, clarity fuels the mind. When clarity dims, discipline steadies the hands. When discipline falters, endurance carries you forward. Endurance is not optional for those called to greatness. It is the very mechanism by which the mind, body, and spirit are aligned with destiny. It is the divine engine that turns fleeting sparks of motivation into lifelong flames of achievement. The lazy mind learns nothing, the undisciplined mind drifts, but the mind trained in endurance becomes unstoppable, a vessel through which God's purpose flows with power and precision. This is the final key to train not just for immediate gain, but for a life of lasting impact where the brain is hardwired for persistent action and every challenge is transformed into an opportunity for holy growth.